So, in big letters here, you need to use your imagination. You're going to use your imagination a lot this afternoon. There's a big word here that says sustainability, which has disappeared, which is not the reality. Sustainability is here to stay. And the point of the discussion today, or the talk really, is sustainability getting closer or further away post-COVID? I deliberately don't want to talk too much about COVID because we're all fed up with COVID. I really kind of want to talk about where we go next. Because COVID perhaps has given us some ideas about the possibility for change and the possibility that that change might be more in the direction of sustainability. One thing I will say, Craig's not here right now, so we can talk about him behind his back. A couple of days ago he said to me he was quite keen that I tried to use some of my travel experience and bring that into the course, try and bring that kind of international aspect to life. Those of you that are events, which I know is most of you, don't have that international word in your course. Whereas us tourism people, us hospitality people, we're studying international tourism, international hospitality. So the examples that I give you today are going to have that kind of international flavour to them, and you can thank Craig for that, or you can tell him what a silly idea that was, depending on how you feel at the end. Now, I recognise a number of faces in the room. You're the people that have had 12 weeks of sustainability from me this semester. So maybe I should ask you to tell everybody else what you think sustainability is. But for the benefit of those that aren't aware, essentially sustainability is a concept that talks about how we can manage our industry, whether that be events or tourism, or building houses, or selling sheep, how we can organise our industry, whatever industry it is, in a way that sustains it, not just to create opportunities for people now, to give benefits to people now, but also in the future, so that by our actions we're not denying the benefits of those opportunities to sell sheep or organise events to future generations. Now, in the academic context, we often talk about the 3 pillars of sustainability. In an industry context, we talk often about the triple bottom line. And the triple bottom line is the kind of picture that I've chosen to kind of share with you here. So sustainability is about people. It's about operating in a way that benefits our employees, that creates a lively, successful workforce. But it's also about the people who are affected or impacted upon by whichever industry we're talking about. So in tourism, quite often when we travel, we go and visit different locations and we have a great time on our holiday in amongst other people who are helping us have a great time. So the employees in the hotels or the restaurants that we might visit when we're on holiday, but also the host communities, the people who don't work in tourism perhaps. We drive through their villages, we have picnics on their village green, we have an impact, we have an impact on those people as well. So sustainability is taking care of the workforce, but also the host community. It's thinking about the planet, environmental issues. And that's one area where there's perhaps been a really noticeable increase in people's awareness of our impacts on the planet. I'm sure you all recycle at home avidly. You recycle at university, I imagine, because we've got bins to allow you to do that. We think a bit more carefully about our impact on the planet. So sustainability covers that, but it also covers the economic side of industry. Profit in triple bottom line terms. We need a vibrant industry. You're all going to be leaving here at some point in the future looking for careers and jobs. You need careers and jobs to be able to pay your mortgage, perhaps to bring up your family, to go and explore the world in the way that you want to explore the world. We all need a livelihood. So sustainability is about making sure that that industry brings those benefits, those employment benefits, creates good wages, and so that people aren't exploited or people aren't necessarily diminished in their opportunities through poor pay. So that was 12 weeks worth of sustainability. So COVID-19, a lot of press in the last 2 years within the tourism industry, within the hospitality industry, talking about what's been the impact of COVID on our industry. And we know what that impact is. It's been decimated, shut down. Large sectors of the tourism industry not been able to operate. Some of the tour operators that we may have travelled with pre-COVID no longer exist. They've gone bust because they couldn't market their wares, so they weren't able to sell product to us. The event industry, you will know, massively interrupted. We've had to pivot to online. That's worked in some areas. It's perhaps not worked in others. But there's been a lot of kind of people have been taking that opportunity. If they've been able to survive COVID, as they've been surviving COVID, they've been thinking, are there things we could do differently here? And we just heard from Kathy about this idea about hybrid events and whether there's some elements of that that can be retained in the future. There are skills there that we don't want to lose. In tourism, which is kind of my area of industry experience, people have been thinking, well, is this the opportunity now to perhaps reformat tourism? Can we make tourism better? We've not been able to engage in it in the same way that we have done for the last 50 years. Maybe this is the chance to go, we could do this differently, we could make this better. Because I think we could probably all identify examples of where tourism can be really good. We've all had good holiday experiences. We can all see successful destinations, successful cities off the back of tourism. We've just talked with Rachel, Craig, Kirsten about what can Aberdeen do to kind of capitalise on future tourism. So those discussions have been happening. This is one quotation amongst many from the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, and it kind of encapsulates the discussion that's been going on in the latter stages of COVID. Many countries who previously would have been very popular, were very key destinations on the tourist map, are now developing measures to build a more resilient tourism economy that can survive, be sustainable. These include preparing plans to support sustainable recovery of tourism, promoting digital transition, moving to a greener tourism system. People have had time to think, take a step back, think about what works, what doesn't work, can we make it better? So here we go, in our little globe-trotting travel around the world, Amsterdam. This is one example of something that COVID perhaps has given us as a learning point. Amsterdam is a city I'm sure some of you have been to. More recently in the tourism framework, it's been recognised as a destination that's struggled with over-tourism, too many tourists. The citizens of Amsterdam actually were perhaps not quite as upset as maybe some of you were, as I was, about COVID, because it meant that their city became their city again. They weren't faced with tens of thousands of tourists visiting the city. And if you don't work in tourism, tourists are kind of a bit annoying, really. They get in the way. They're in the queue in front of you in the supermarket. You can't find a table at your local cafe or restaurant because it's full of tourists. If you work in tourism, that's great. You see the benefit of that straight away. But increasingly in destinations like Amsterdam, not just Amsterdam, Barcelona, Edinburgh, possibly, people see perhaps over-tourism as being an issue, too many tourists. So here's an opportunity. COVID has made these people realise that perhaps we don't want tourism to be like it was before. We want to try and bring tourism back, but can we do it differently? And last year in Amsterdam, the local government in Amsterdam came up with a decision to start licensing rental accommodation. So they had an issue, they perceived an issue with Airbnb. Too many properties being turned over to holiday lets, short-term lets, not enough accommodation for local people, prices going up. So they've decided to introduce a licensing scheme, and the early signs are that they've cut in half the number of private short holiday lets in Amsterdam, which creates more reasonable rents, long-term rents for local people, for families, people that might otherwise want to live in Amsterdam. So there's an opportunity there that's been grasped in Amsterdam. Okay, so we're not quite international, but this is in England. If you've never heard of Margate, we're down on the south coast. The opportunity that COVID gave us in the UK was obviously that opportunity for domestic providers. When we weren't locked down, when we were allowed out, we still weren't allowed to travel, and people began to rediscover the kind of opportunities on their doorstep. So the UK seaside towns saw a bit of a renaissance. In Scotland, we saw a couple of times during the pandemic, when we were allowed out, a big increase in the number of people coming up to this part of the world. if you try to book a campsite or a holiday cottage, or maybe even a hotel room at some point in last summer, you may well have struggled. Either A, finding somewhere that was vacant, or B, affording the cost that you were being charged because the increased demand meant that prices went up. So is there something here for us? Have we rejuvenated, almost by accident, off the back of COVID, our domestic tourism offering? This isn't directly related to tourism, but it's somewhere that I've been, it's somewhere that I would encourage you to go if you get the chance. India, as a destination, one of the unintended consequences of COVID that they experienced in Delhi, this is the capital city, this is India Gate, was the change in air quality. Delhi is an awfully smoggy city. It suffers from this kind of air quality on a regular basis. So much so that when I was working in tourism and travel, a number of customers I would speak to would actively say, we only want to spend one night in Delhi because it's got that reputation for being like this. If you're an asthmatic, even if you're not an asthmatic, it's very difficult to catch your breath in hot temperature when you've got polluted skies like this. During the pandemic, that's not because of a lack of tourists, that's a lack of other industries. But again, we began to realise this kind of brings home the impact that we have on the planet. The environment is part of what we talk about in terms of sustainability. Llandudno, we're still international. Wales. You must remember these guys. Early superstars of the pandemic, Kashmiri goats. Closest I've ever been to a Kashmiri goat is probably a curry in India, but anyway. There were lots of stories about the resurgence of wildlife. Some of them were true, like goats in Llandudno. There's a really good photograph of a bunch of goats stood outside a travel agent's. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it, otherwise that would have been my perfect connection. There were other stories that were less true, like dolphins swimming through the canals of Venice. That was fake news. Sorry to bring up another kind of past horror story, but anyway. So, the resurgence of wildlife, the realization that this would never have happened. This is not happening now because life has come back to normal. Now, if you do a trawl through various websites, tourism stakeholders, don't worry, you don't have to. I've done that for you. You will see that a lot of people within the industry, different parts of the industry, visit Scotland, so destination marketing organisations, using COVID as a chance to think about what do we do next, what happens when we're allowed out, when tourism comes back in the way that we hope it will. The Association of British Travel Agents, Booking.com, American Express, EasyJet. These are all organisations that have been thinking, studying, researching what happens when we're allowed out once more, when we get back to travel more freely. You'll see the ones I've picked all link into sustainability. Now that's not accidental, I'm here to talk to you about sustainability, but there is oodles of evidence. You don't have to believe me, you don't even have to believe ABTA, you can believe EasyJet or Booking.com. Doesn't matter if you value one more than the other, the common message here is that sustainability or sustainable issues are at the forefront of a lot of consumers' minds. COVID, perhaps through those news stories about Kashmiri goats, or Amsterdam being deserted, or Barcelona suddenly deciding that, actually life is much nicer without tourists. Many people have seen that perhaps there is a different way to do things. So Google, 70% rise in people searching for sustainable travel options. I actually think that's one of the more important ones. You could argue that ABTA have a vested interest. They're obviously going to be keen for tourism to come back in some form because they are the Association of British Travel Agents. Similarly, EasyJet, clearly they're going to want to persuade us that they're going to be sustainable because they're an airline, they want our business. Google, they've got no vested interest in travel, but the message is similar. These statistics, these figures, are all around that kind of 70-80% mark of consumers wanting to travel. So all good. Let's go to Venice. Cruise ships. We talked about cruise ships earlier on. One of the things that happened last year during the pandemic, at its height, arguably, the Italian government made an announcement that they were going to ban cruise ships coming into the centre of Venice. Now, I've not been to Venice. It's not somewhere that I've been. I've sent other people to Venice. Apparently, it's wonderful. It's on my list, but not quite like this. This kind of image gives me the kind of shivers. This is what happens in Venice, or was happening on a regular basis pre-COVID. But the local government here took the decision in March 2021 to kind of stop this happening. That picture wasn't taken before March 2021, it was taken in June 2021. Having announced no more cruise ships in the centre of Venice because of the damage that they can do to the foundations of the properties, because of the pollution that comes out of a cruise ship. They actually have more emissions than a jet aircraft. They pollute in a much more serious way. People aren't necessarily aware of that, but that's the case. In June 2021, power of the cruise industry, particularly MSC, who are an Italian-based organisation, let's go back to normal. Now, for complete transparency, I will say that the Italian government said, oh, that was a mistake. It was only going to be, we were talking about a ban, we didn't actually bring it in. But we're going to think about it. But the outcry when this happened was so great in Italy, in Venice in particular, obviously. They have now introduced some new regulations. And currently, if you have a ship of this size, the MSC Orchestra, you cannot bring it into the centre of Venice anymore. You have to tether on the mainland, you get small tenders across. But if you're on a smaller ship, you can still come into the centre of Venice. Now, I don't know about you, but 180 metres, it's quite a big ship. Yeah? 35 metres in height. That's over 100 feet high. That's still a big ship. In fact, it's a ship that would be big enough to carry 3,000 people. So we haven't quite cracked the cruise ship number yet. We're on home soil, Barrow. Now, I got this email on the 20th of November. As it says here, the relevance here is at COP26, which you all have heard of. It was in the news, we couldn't escape it. It was ended on the 26th of November. I got this email on the 20th of November. And it was from Loganair. Now, I've got no axe to grind with Loganair. I've got students that I've taught before who work for Loganair and they're doing very well. But if you can't read it, this email said, hello, Stephen. They call me Stephen. You can call me Steve. That's fine. The extraordinary flight experience. A beach landing. It's the only one in the world, in fact. Barrow, small island in the Outer Hebrides, doesn't have a regular runway, so the sandy beach is your airstrip. It's undoubtedly one for your bucket list. Ticket off today with our promotional day return fare. £85 per person, bookable via our call centre, blah, blah, blah. Hurry, it's subject to availability. So at a time when the world was talking about the urgent need for us to limit our impact on the environment, and they're having that conversation in Glasgow, we've got a Scottish airline offering flights from Glasgow just so people can fly, land on the beach, take off and come back to Glasgow again for £85 return. Where's this reset of travel and tourism? How does that make any, that really you can tell, that annoyed me greatly. I wrote back, hello, Loganair. Have you heard about COP26? You can go online at any point and find any number of websites that will show you how to calculate your carbon footprint. The carbon footprint of one passenger on this plane, 0.13 tonne. That's equivalent to the energy that will be used to apparently make 2,534 cups of coffee. If we are able to meet the targets that we're told we have to meet to kind of arrest climate change and stop some of the worst things happening, that one flight would be 11% of our annual allowance. If you try to divide up what we on the planet need to do in order to stop climate change having the worst effects, that one flight would use up 11% of your total carbon output. So if you drive a car, if you have a wood-burning stove at home, if you do all those things that we tend to do, like drink cups of coffee and just create carbon dioxide, yeah, we're going to be in trouble. Reset? Or is it just going back to behaving the way we used to pre-COVID? Last example, Dubai. A lot of students love the idea of going to Dubai. It's not what you're expecting. What's this got to do with Dubai? What's this got to do with sustainability? Employment, creating jobs, sustainable jobs, jobs that pay well, jobs that will allow people and families to have a good quality of life, standard of living. You know, if you weren't aware, we're now owned by a Dubai-based company who, as we all know, probably decided to sack the workforce and replace them with a cheaper workforce. A reset? Have we learned anything? Are we being more sustainable? How are we doing? Sustainability is not a new concept. Came to kind of become a more familiar, an idea that was promoted, and more organisations, governments embracing it as something they wanted to do, really back in the kind of mid to late 1980s. So we've had opportunities, we've had businesses, individuals working quite hard in terms of thinking about how we can achieve sustainability across all sorts of different kind of industry sectors. And its success or failure has always been down to those efforts of both individuals, some people who've been pioneering in terms of the work they've tried to do to create awareness and change the way certain types of businesses operate, but also organisations. And that hasn't changed. I would say, as a message in terms of what do we do from here moving forwards, it's still going to be about organisations. It's still going to be about stakeholders in tourism, hospitality, the events industry, but it's still going to be about individuals. It's going to be about us as individuals in our workplace, making sure that the way in which our business works and operates, the decisions that we take, perhaps reminding people that sustainability is important, because it's important to have good quality employment, it's important to have good relations with your neighbours, good impact, lessen the negative impacts on host communities. It's important to care for the environment. But not just about as employees, but as individuals, the choices we make. I bet some of you are thinking, I would like to go to Barrow and land on the beach. That's a choice. You can make that choice. I'm not going to stop you. I may think slightly less of you if you choose to make that choice, but I won't be around to see it, probably. It still is. And sustainability has been the focus within the tourism industry in particular, in a very active way for over 20 years. None of what I've said to you today is kind of new, really. New examples, more up-to-date examples, arguably. But I first started to talk to students about sustainability 20 years ago. So how come we're still having to talk about how can we do this? Here's a couple of examples of how it used to be, or how it started. Green tourism. Some of you may have heard of this. You've probably seen the labels on doors to cafes and shops and tourist attractions. Green tourism business scheme started in 1997. And that was started in Scotland. Visit Scotland were one of the key kind of players in setting up this system, how businesses could be more responsible in relation to the environment. This is not a shameless plug for a company I used to work for, although this is a company I did work for. It's just because I know exactly what this company did. In 2002, this company worked with an organisation called Tourism Concern to make sure that those companies that operated trekking holidays, and that was part of my background in adventure travel, paid the porters and the Sherpas that would work with the tourists, carry the luggage, do the guiding, were paid a fair wage, and weren't expected to carry ridiculous amounts of luggage on their backs. So this was happening. Green tourism scheme back in the late 90s, last part of the last century. Montagues were doing that in terms of porter awareness back in 2002. Now, more organisations have come on board since then. In 2007, and I know this I was working at this company at the time then, we took a decision to offset the carbon on all of the flights that our passengers took. I wasn't super in favour of it. Those of you that are familiar with offsetting know it's a kind of slightly controversial subject. The idea is, yes, I'm going to get on a plane, but I'll make myself be a bit better by taking some money and paying somebody to go and plant some trees, and those trees will make up for the carbon that I'm burning in my flight. It's a way of almost trying to kind of just reduce the guilt factor as you get on the steps of the plane. But we took a decision that we were just going to do that. So whenever anybody booked a holiday with us, automatically, they didn't opt in or opt out, that's what we were going to do. And we didn't even make a big play of it. We didn't even talk about it much. We just did it because we thought it was something to do, something we could contribute. EasyJet do that too. They have done since 2019. A gap here. Companies in the tourism space, in the hospitality space, have been being sustainable or striving to be more sustainable for quite a long time. Sadly, it's taken some of the bigger players, companies that you have heard, because I'm pretty sure you haven't heard of these guys. They're coming along, but it's taken some time. Jet.E, who now have kind of moved in to become probably the second biggest tour operator since the demise of Thomas Cook. Jet.E have kind of moved into that space and they've grown to become the second biggest mass market operator. They announced that they were going to offset flights at the beginning of this year. So it's easy for me to criticise these guys because, you know, come on, the party started in 2007. Where have you been? But on the other hand, at least they're here. They are here to play now. Why are they here now? Possibly because the research from 2021 and before has increasingly been that consumers are beginning to become more aware, beginning to make choices based around wanting to do better environmentally or sustainably. Now, finishing off, let's go back to that figure that I quoted to you before from that list of statistics, the Google one, about 70% rise in people. 70% more people searching for more sustainable ways to travel. The other part of that research uncovered by Google was that only about a third of those people knew how to do it, kind of understood what was more sustainable or less sustainable, or had the ability to source companies that were being more sustainable. So the awareness is there, people want to be more sustainable, but Google's sort of basically saying, we need to work harder at showing them how to do it. People want it. People say they want it. There will always be some people that say they want it because they think it's the right thing to say, and then maybe then get on the plane to Barra. But many more people actively want to do it, but sadly are not quite sure how. It's one of the reasons why in 2007 we decided to offset the flights anyway, because we didn't think the awareness was there at that point. We were aware, we wanted to do something, which again comes back to that idea about being sustainable, making the industry more sustainable comes down to organisations, but individuals within organisations. So if I leave you with anything, it would be these few suggestions in terms of trying to, what can we do, whether it be events, hospitality or tourism, to kind of make people more aware so that they can achieve what they want to achieve. Well, look and learn. What are other people doing? When you go into industry, think about the company that you're working for. Is it doing the best that it can do? Look at your competitors. What are they doing? EasyJet and Jet.E have obviously looked around to see what they can do to be more sustainable, and they've lighted on the idea of doing what they do. It's taken them a while to get there, but they've discovered that there are lots and lots of companies out there that have been good and working hard in this space. Often they're niche, so they're not widely known about, so you need to do your research. You need to have a look. Who are the players out there? Don't just look at the big ones, look at the small ones. Can you learn from what other organisations do? Tell your customers what you're doing. So we didn't talk about offsetting flights at the time. I'm still not 100% convinced that's the right thing to do. But when I say tell people what you're doing, I deliberately don't mean tell them you're being sustainable. first thing that rings alarm bells for me when I look at EasyJet's website is their sustainability policy. Because it's all about how they're doing this, that and the other, and that's good, but they're not sustainable. Flying in a jet aircraft is not sustainable. It's just being less bad than it might otherwise be, because they're making some efforts. But tell people what you're doing. Don't necessarily use sustainability as the word. There's still a lot of kind of confusion about that, what that term means. But if you are recycling, if you are reducing your carbon footprint, use that terminology. Talk about why the things that you're doing are going to benefit your customers. So if you're organising events, you may well want to partner with bus companies to offer discount travel to and from your event site. Tell your customers that's what you're doing. They don't need to bring their car. You've got transport laid on, no hassle with car parking. You can tell them it's better for the environment, but you don't have to say this is our sustainable transport policy. People don't worry too much about that. Sell them the benefits of what you're doing. In tourism, it would be similar. It's about talking about the destinations you're going. Who are the guides? Are they local people? When you visit local communities, how much of the money that tourism spend is staying in that local community? Why is that a good thing? Because it helps us to support education, health, standard of living in developing world countries. So I'm not 100% moving forwards. The word sustainability is necessary. And this kind of backs this up in terms of people not quite sure what those choices are. I think one of the options moving forwards is for you to use your knowledge. I'm talking here mainly to the students in the room, what you grasp, what you take from your degree here in terms of sustainability, and just put it into practice as closely as you can. Don't worry about sustainable policies, think about actions. Right, I'm going to leave you with another quote. I might even, if the graphic can't work properly, leave you with two quotes. No, here's one. Okay. This is the one that I'm happy for professionals in the room to take on board and nod sagely and go, yes, very wise. P.H.E. was a management writer, academic. The best way to predict the future is to create it. Talking to you. I'm talking to you. Okay, your holidays, your events, the things that you organise in future. You know, I might be a passenger. I might have my grandchildren going to your event at some point. You need to grasp this. We all need to grasp it, but you've got more time to grasp it than I have. Second quote, less professional, but no swear words. Now, you can use your own imagination. If you think that's disgusting, well, that's your toilet habits, that's not mine, okay? It's saying the same thing as this, but in a slightly more humorous way. Tom Lehrer was a 1950s American humorist, satirist. Used to sing songs and come up with things like that. Okay. I think that says the end.